if I can't get help from a real mechanic, I've got to figure this out. Unfortunately, I've had a bad string of luck trying to find a mechanic that I can trust. So if you're new here, my name is Scott. This is my YouTube channel, StaticCampervan. And yes, I have been living out of this Ram ProMaster City now for about 8.5 years. This van is a 2015, and I just want to say straight away that this has been the most reliable vehicle I have ever owned. Now, that makes it sound a little better than it actually is, because I've had a number of problems with this little Ram ProMaster City, although thankfully Chrysler has really stepped up and they've taken care of a bunch of the problems under recall. So what would have cost me several $1,000s in repairs, Chrysler has taken care of. It's made owning this van a little bit better for me, but still, even with all the recalls and all the little issues, this van has still been the most reliable vehicle I've ever owned. Now, it is getting older. I'm approaching 100,000 miles, and that means that things are starting to wear out. So the issue I've got right now, I'm not sure if it's something that's breaking down and needs to be fixed, or if it's more of a maintenance issue. So I've got my code reader out here, and this is a real basic code reader. It doesn't give me a whole lot of functionality, but it will tell me some faults that might be going on with the engine. Now, I need to point out here that one of the recalls with these Ram ProMaster Cities is the engine itself. And the engine was engineered incorrectly, and because Chrysler couldn't figure out a fix for it, to solve that problem, they're just offering new engines if your engine will qualify for the recall. There's some things to do. I've been through that recall process. The van needs to burn a certain amount of oil over a certain period of time. Run the van for 1,500 miles. If the van uses more than a quart of oil during that time period, then you get a new engine. And that's real nice. The funny thing is, it doesn't actually solve the problem. The original engineering issue with the engine still exists. And in a case like mine, where I have one of the better made engines here from Chrysler, if I did get that recall, there's a possibility that the new engine that got put in the van would be worse than the engine that I have now. Now, obviously, I've got 100,000 miles on the van now, so it still would be a plus to be able to get that recall done. But so far, Chrysler has not wanted to honor the recall in my case, and that's again because my engine is just a little bit better made than most of them. So, good news, bad news is I don't qualify for the recall. So I'm hoping that the little issue I've got going on right now is not related to that engineering issue, but we don't really know. But let me plug in my code reader and I can show you what I'm finding. All these code readers work exactly the same, whether you have a real basic one like I do, or whether you have a real fancy one like a proper mechanic would. First thing we need to do is just turn our key on to the first position, but not turn the engine over. And then we're going to take our code reader and plug it into the port that's right at the bottom of the instrument cluster here in the front of the vehicle. And as soon as we plug the device in, that will power it up and allow us to diagnose any faults that are going on in the vehicle. Now, in a normal circumstance, you would reach for a code reader if you have an engine light on your dash. Now, oddly, I have not had an engine light on my dash, but the van definitely has some issues. The one thing is that the power is down on the van, very difficult to go up hills. The other thing is it runs very rough, and it normally runs more rough when it's first starting up and warming up, but there's a definite misfire there that I notice when the van is idling. The third thing is my fuel mileage has plummeted, and that's a bad thing, especially when you spend most of your time in California like I do, that has notoriously bad gas prices. So this is something that if I can't get help from a real mechanic, I've got to figure this out. So even though my code reader is very simple, I have noticed that if I dive into the settings and just check every little thing, that I have found that there is a misfire on Well, today it's showing that I have a misfire on bank number 3. So this is a 4-cylinder engine, and it's telling me that bank 3 does have a misfire. Now, I did go through this a couple of days ago and check for misfires. I found that banks 1, 2, and 3 were showing misfires with the code reader. I reset the codes and then have been driving around a little bit and then rechecked them today. And today I'm only getting one that's showing just that one misfire on bank number 3. But that does kind of tell me that what I suspect is going on is I do need some new coil packs in the van, or sometimes they're called ignition coils. And this is a very common thing that is a problem with Chrysler vehicles. So any Chrysler vehicle seems to have an issue with coil packs. So this has given me enough information that I'm going to go ahead and order some new coil packs for the van and install them. Now, installing new parts may seem kind of daunting if you're not mechanically inclined, but I can tell you I am not mechanically inclined, but I've done this recently here in the past. I did replace my spark plugs recently, although I did not replace the coils, which in hindsight I probably should have done, but we'll talk a little bit more about why I know that later. But if you want to do this yourself, really it's a very simple job. Normally there's this little beauty cover that goes over top, and that just clips into place. Once we get the cover off, we have full access to the parts that we need to replace. These are the coil packs that we need to swap out, and they're right up here on top. The lucky thing for me is this is a 4-cylinder engine, and so everything is pretty open and easy to get to. But this is as far as I'm going to go today. I'm just going to put this cover back on because I need to order those parts before I can replace them. Well, I'm about ready for a cup of coffee, so I'm back in my van and I'll get the kettle on and brew myself up a cup. But before I do that, I just want to talk a little bit more about these scanners. Now, this scanner I bought from Amazon off a recommendation from one of the big YouTube mechanic channels here. I'm not going to mention the mechanic's name, but he's the older guy that likes to scream and yell and flail his arms about. I don't want to say his name because I am tired of watching his videos anymore. They're just a little too much for me. I bought this one off his recommendation because I thought he wasn't selling anything, and so I figured it would be a little bit better quality. I don't think it's quite the right scanner for most people. It's very, very basic, as I mentioned, but I also find it to be a little bit confusing to use. Now, maybe that's because I'm not a mechanic and I have trouble deciphering the information it's giving me. I don't know. Most people like to have one of these scanners that runs through their phone. So there's a little plug and scanner all together, and then you would just download an app on your phone and they would work together that way. I don't want anything like that because I am tired of anything that I buy that has an app. I don't want to download another app for as long as I live. Unfortunately, apps are here to stay, but whenever I can get away from buying something that requires an app to use, that's the way I go. So that was another reason I went with this simple one. There are much better ones that are still simple that I think would be better. It's serving me just fine, and it gave me the information that I needed to know in this instance. At least I think so. If you want to know how this goes, you'll have to look at a future video once I get the parts in and get them replaced. But coffee now first. Now, I may not know very much about mechanical stuff, but I do know what I like when it comes to coffee, and I'm drinking some local stuff here from Humboldt Bay, and I like a couple of their coffees. This is one of the two that I really like. They have an Ethiopian coffee that's very good too, but this is one of the coffees I drink when I'm around the Northern California area, so obviously I've been drinking a lot of Humboldt Bay coffee here lately. So even though I don't have a whole lot of experience fixing vehicles, I found that all the information that I really need is normally very easy to find just by Googling it. And so that's how I found out that these coil packs for Chrysler vehicles are notoriously bad. There's a lot of information on Google about that. I also found out that coil packs have a fairly short lifespan, so even if mine weren't faulty, they're probably past their lifespan. So I think what I've got going on here is just regular maintenance and not necessarily something that needs to be fixed. But we'll see how this goes. Of course, I do need to order these parts, and I did do some checking and found that the best price for parts of all kinds is a company called Rock Auto, and I've ordered from them before. I thought that their prices were really excellent, and just to give you a comparison, these coil packs from a dealer would be about $100 a piece, but the same part from Rock Auto would be $77 each. Now I need 4 of them, so that adds up pretty quickly. So I think I'm gonna stay away from the original parts from the dealer and just buy some good quality parts from a manufacturer that I can get at a local auto parts store here. That'll save me a little bit of money, and also I'll be able to get them a little bit quicker and get them installed faster. So that's how I'm going to do this. I think that it's really critically important that if we own a vehicle, that we know as much as we possibly can about that vehicle. Even if we're not going to do any work ourselves on the vehicle, we should know as much about how it works and how it operates that we possibly could know. It's getting to be hard to find mechanics to work on our vehicles, and I think a lot of time we talk poorly about mechanics and just say that they're all always trying to get us and that they overcharge and that they don't know what they're doing. And I think really more what's happening is that vehicles are just getting to be so complex that it's getting to be harder and harder to work on. I think that that's really the main issue. Now my van, even though it's not terribly new, it's 2015, it's loaded with tons of electronics and computers that monitor all kinds of things that are going on with the van. And anytime that any work is done, there's a possibility that those computer modules and things can get damaged, and that adds to the complexity of working on these vehicles. So I think we kind of give mechanics a hard time. Of course, there still are a lot of bad mechanics that just don't care and that are out to rip somebody off, but I think the bigger issue now is that these vehicles are just getting to be really just too complex. If you've got an older vehicle, you know, I'd say fantastic for you. Anybody that has a newer vehicle like mine, you know, we're in for some trouble whenever we go to fix it, and that includes maintenance. And in fact, that brings up kind of a sad story I have that I've kind of pieced together that goes back several years, and that is kind of related to this whole trusting mechanics issue that I've been talking about here. If you've been following me, you might know that I've had some transmission issues with my van, and I've had several people reach out and offer suggestions on how to solve that. Usually it's something like I need to check the fluid levels in the transmission or get the transmission fluid changed. And that could be some good advice for some people. Now, unfortunately, I know, because I've done some research on this van, that that's not a possibility with this certain transmission. And this is one of the reasons why I say that we need to know as much about our vehicle as possible. This transmission that Chrysler put in this van is made by a company, a German company called ZF. And ZF has been selling transmissions to almost every auto manufacturer out there. And they've been doing so for a number of years, obviously, this being in 2015. I think part of the thing with a lot of the automotive manufacturers is if they can outsource something, they do. And so there's this company that specializes in making transmissions. That means that Chrysler doesn't have to put in any R&D time in designing their own transmissions. They can just go order one and get one supplied by an outside company. And of course, a lot of other companies are doing the same thing. ZF, I believe, is the largest transmission maker in the world, and they do really sell to everybody. The one bad thing about these modern transmissions that come from ZF is that they are sealed for the life of the vehicle. So there's no way to check the transmission fluid. In fact, there's no way to actually drain the fluid easily. If you want to drain the fluid or even check the fluid in one of these, vans, you've got to partially remove the transmission from the engine. That's the only way to check and to replace the fluid. And what had happened several years ago, I was doing a little bit of research and saw that you're supposed to change your transmission fluid at 30,000 miles. So I went to a dealer, a Chrysler dealer, and asked them to do that. And they told me that no, it wasn't something that they recommend me to do because it's a big job. And they didn't explain it any more than that to me, other than that it was a big job and it was going to cost a lot of money. Now, previously to that, another dealership wanted to do it, and they wanted to charge me something like $350 to replace the transmission fluid because they said, you know, it's getting near 30,000 miles. And I opted not to do it at the time, mostly because I just didn't have the money to do it. I was making 10 bucks an hour back then, and I just didn't have 2 nickels to rub together, even though I didn't pay rent. Just wasn't enough money to go around, and so I opted to not do it. But when I had a little more cash on hand, I tried to get it done at this other dealership. And this is where this dealership let me down, because they should have explained it a little bit better to me. And at the time, I didn't know about the transmission, being that it was supposedly sealed for life, and that transmission fluid was supposedly good for the life of the transmission. So I dropped it. I didn't opt to have it done. I believe they did tell me it would be somewhere between $600 and $700 to do the job. They did give me a figure for it, but they told me that they didn't want to do it. Just flat out didn't want to do it. So if I had known a little bit more about my van and the parts that it had, I would have probably just gone to another dealer and had it done. Had the transmission fluid replaced, even though it was going to be a lot of money. I probably would have had it done back then. But I trusted this dealership, and they let me down. That's not the only thing that they let me down on. I've had numerous problems with that particular dealership. I won't say who it is, but it's a dealership in the Seattle, Washington area. And I don't use them anymore when I am in that area. Nowadays I go to Tacoma Chrysler because I found them to be much more reliable. So a little bit of a drive from Seattle to Tacoma, but if you are in the area, they are the dealership that I recommend. And I think probably if I'd have just got a second opinion or did a little bit more research back at the time, maybe I wouldn't be in such a bad place that I am in now. At the point that I'm at now, my home dealership in Humboldt, in Eureka, they've told me that they don't want to replace the transmission fluid because they figure that the transmission will slip, and that at that point I would need a new transmission to be put in. So they've told me they don't really want to do it, but they'll do it if I want to do it, but they don't think it's a good idea to do it at this point. So if you're wondering why I haven't taken your suggestion in the past about replacing my transmission fluid or even checking it, that's the whole reason. It's not something that I can do. I just can't. I don't have the ability to remove the transmission myself to check the fluid. And at this point, the trusted mechanic that I do have and use mostly is telling me that they don't think it's a good idea at this point. They have told me, like every other mechanic that I've taken it to, the van to, that it's probably time to replace the van, and they would be happy to sell me a new one. Of course, that brings up a whole other problem, doesn't it? So hopefully you can learn a little bit from my mistake. And of course, part of my mistake was just owning a vehicle without having enough money to really maintain it properly. So that's why I'm trying to do a little more of the maintenance myself, just because it is so expensive to have little things done. This little maintenance that I need to do now is going to be several $100s if I take it to any shop. So it's something that I can definitely do myself. But I do kind of wish that I was a little more up to speed on how my van operated back early on, so that I didn't have this maybe bigger of a transmission issue that I'm facing now. Maybe it wouldn't have been such a bad thing if I did get the fluid replaced early on. Although thinking back at the time, I don't know how I could have afforded it back then, making so little money with all the bills that I had. And yeah, even though I wasn't paying rent, there's just not a lot of money going around if you're not making enough per hour. I mean, that's really the issue there, and it continues to kind of be the issue if I don't stay up on the maintenance. Now, one other little thing that I do want to point out, and maybe you've realized this, and I've kind of been back and forth as to whether I should just say this out loud or not, but I'm going to go ahead and say it. I've had several people that have had this same van and ZF transmission tell me that they've had their fluid changed in their transmission at a quick lube place. Probably you've realized that that's not possible at this point. I don't know any quick lube place that can pull off a transmission and put it back on, certainly not in a few minutes time. So there's another reason why we really need to know how our vehicles operate, just so we don't get ripped off, because it's obviously happened to numerous people that I've talked to. This is one of those reasons that I do just urge everybody to just learn as much as you possibly can about your vehicle, and hopefully there are some things that we can fix ourselves going forward. At least that's what I'm trying to do now. I hope this has not been kind of a bummer of a video. I don't look at it that way. I look at everything as kind of a learning experience. And I'm also kind of happy to know that I am able to figure things out. I mean, obviously I'm using some tools, some cheap tools like that OBD2 scanner that I bought, and Google, and just figuring things out on my own. It's a good learning experience for me, and I hope to kind of pass that on in kind of a positive way, even though this is kind of a bummer of a subject, and I don't mean it to be, but it is. I think that we just need to focus on the fact that we are very capable of doing more than we really realize, and sometimes we have to get kind of pushed into a corner to make ourselves do things that we normally don't think that we're quite capable of doing. There are a lot of things that I would take the van in to have done at the dealership over the years, and I think in one way that is very expensive. Oil changes, for instance, are very expensive at the dealership. But on the other hand, that has meant that since the van was at a dealership, they have caught a lot of the problems that would have become an issue down the road. And most of the time they were caught and replaced under warranty. Chrysler's actually been pretty good about warranties with these vans. It's been surprising for me, the number of recalls and warranty coverage that Chrysler has taken care of that they really didn't need to do, but they have done. So that's part of the issue with this van being the most reliable van for me that I've ever owned, and it's just because the maintenance has been taken care of a little bit more. So even though I wasn't able to really afford it out of my pocket, it's great that those recalls existed. The many recalls, I've lost track. It was more than 8, I think, that I can recall just offhand that Chrysler has taken care of. So pretty cool in that aspect. But I think at this point going forward, I'm probably on my own for a lot of these little things. And of course, little things like coil packs are so easy to do ourselves that of course I'm just going to go ahead and get the parts and do it myself. So this doesn't have to be a bummer of a topic. I'm not looking at it that way. But you know what it is a bummer is I'm almost out of coffee. So I think that means I need to end this, make myself another cup, because that's always something that makes me happy, is a nice fresh cup of coffee. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate it.